around Harley John. So that's good to do. Nisa, how are you?
I'm all right. Thank you for asking.
You went well the other day? You're okay?
Yeah, I'm okay now.
Good to hear. All right, team. Now we're going to press on because if we don't, the TV does not turn on. All right, so we're going to jump straight into this window. Always fun jumping into the window.
That was really good, sir.
Thank you. The code should be up in the classroom. 3B8IV. 3B8IV. All right. Yes, it does remind me of the time when I actually had a learner in my class, in one of my classes in year 9. And her name was Ivy. It was the Christmas class. I may have told you about this one before. It was I had 2 Hollies, an Ivy, and a Rudolph in that particular class. It was quite an exciting class. I called it my Christmas class. It was a good one. Rudolph went by Richard. All right, so we should all be in. Okay, let's see. Okay, and I will sign out the duplicates so that they're not there. Good, all coming in, fantastic, brilliant. All right, now, so we're talking about market failure, and it is quite exciting to talk about this. This is very real life. This is situations where you can see things happening all around you. So you've obviously already discussed the idea about obesity in different countries. That is one example of market failure. There are many. And this can be somebody's life. You can actually study this at university, the solutions as to how to solve these, and you can work with government and government bodies, and there are a whole range of different groups of people who will sort out or attempt to sort out some of these market failures. So we press on. The next one is the merit goods, or as you remember all the way back, the good goods, all right? The ones that are deemed to be good for us. All right, so just reviewing that understanding, okay, that the idea that the government says we need these goods, okay, the government in particular, the overarching government, right, could be the local government, doesn't have to be the central. Yeah, 2 minutes. All right, the overarching government says that this good you should consume, all right. So therefore, there is going to be value judgments involved, all right? So whether the government values this, whether the people value that, okay? So it's going to be subjective as to what is a merit good and what isn't. Also, different products that we choose to be classifying as a merit good, they're going to have externalities potentially attached to them. And we're going to discuss externalities in a minute. But the idea that there are merit goods causes us a bit of a problem. So, but first, what examples of merit goods, based on that definition, can you think of? Away you go. I'm just going to pop across over here for a second. All right, sorry, getting him off on his lesson to start the day. Healthcare, education, good work, Sharaf, well done. Yes, indeed. Education, healthcare, public healthcare. Yes, good, all good. IB training programs. Ooh, interesting. Electric cars, vaccines. Very good, Kendrick. Well done. Okay. Andrew, yes. Go on, have a go. See what you can come up with. They're going to cause us a problem, this idea of merit goods, necessities. Oh, excellent. Right? Reasoning being is because of their very nature. We've said, let's go back one. We've said that they are good goods, that the government says that we should have them. So there's that value judgment involved. So why don't we use them? Why are we not consuming education? Why are we not consuming the necessities, so the vegetables? Why are we not consuming the healthcare? Well, maybe it's that it's too expensive. Maybe it's that we don't value it ourselves, but the government values it. Right? So here's some examples just to throw into your additional mix of real life examples here. Yes, training programs, the environmental improvement schemes, public libraries, museums, cultural facilities, any social service-based program. Right? Inoculation programs, they're all good. Now, merit goods are the ones the government feels people under-consume. Therefore, there is the failure. We're not consuming them at the level that the government feels we should be. So therefore, maybe the government will possibly subsidise them or might even provide them for free, right? At which point they're paid for and funded by the government. Right? So consumption of a merit good is actually believed to be good for us. So there's going to be what's called positive externality effects. Right? So that's all necessary, okay, to understand. But a merit good is one that society values. So therefore, whether you want it or not, society is going to say you need it. So the classic example is education, right? And if we look at other countries around the world, say New Zealand might be an example, right? The government says you need to be in education. So they put a law in place that says from the age of 5 through to the age of 16, it is legal that you must be in a form of education. Now, it might be that they're homeschooled. It might be that they're in a training, university training program or some other training program, but they have to be from that age to that age in a form of education. Now, I don't know if the rule is the same here in Malaysia. I don't know, right? But that's an example that I know of. Now, whether the child wants to be in school or not, that's a whole different story. But the government and society says, yes, it is needed, right, for you to be in education. Okay. Close gaps. Where you go. Oh, good scores coming through. Keep going. There's a few of you haven't got it yet. Come on, close the gaps. Oops, something happened. Sorry, I don't know what happened. Oh, apologies if I've just crashed the thing. I think I have. Sorry, I pushed a button. I'm not used to this mouse and I pushed a button. All right, okay, sorry. All right, now we should be back. Excellent. Okay. Still a few of you to have a go, closing the gaps. Work. Get yourself a drink as well, please, son. All right, well done. Now, merit goods and the idea of value judgments. Now, we've talked about this before, and this is something that comes into being, particularly when we're thinking about government policy, all right? So if the government policy is to provide a merit good or a meritable good, all right, then you are using those value judgments. And as we said before, the value judgments are going to be potentially based on what society wants or society desires, and dependent on which governing body you elect, there may be different value judgments and different decisions, different policy decisions based on their particular values or the values that they are taking from society. So what's good or bad? Okay, there is an element of what's called paternalism involved. Now, it's a word that you may not be as familiar with. You see the word paternal, that means parent. Right? So we're giving the government the job of being our parent, right? Telling us what is good or bad for us. Does the government have sufficient information to figure out the value on society of these socially desirable goods, like health and education? Can the government actually figure out how much education is needed? Can the government figure out how much health is actually needed? All right. Now, in New Zealand, the government has like a statistic, a tracking statistic with regards to how much education they need to provide. So if they're needing to increase the number of schools or add more funding for teachers, etc., they've got this statistic and they track it over time. And what they ended up working out, this is going back a couple of years now, was that they were underestimating the number of students that were going to be in the schools. And they were underestimating the number of students by quite a margin. And all of a sudden it came to a head that in New Zealand we had far too few schools and we had massive classes. Okay, one of the schools that we had in New Zealand was over 3,000 students, and the average class size in that school, it was a high school, the average class size in that school was 32 students. And I can remember talking to the teachers that taught there, and they basically said that they stood in a corner of the classroom and the students were just everywhere around them and they just couldn't move because there was just wall-to-wall students, which you can imagine wouldn't be necessarily the most fun thing. Right? Now, the state normally provides those merit goods, and they quite often will give them free of charge, if not heavily subsidized, because maybe the people on the lower income, they may not be able to afford them. So therefore, it becomes an equity argument, which is one of our major themes. So there is a question about whether this is going to be efficient, whether there's going to be an information failure within the market, but there's also an understanding here about the equity idea, that we should be providing these goods based on the equity argument. So what is the equity argument relating to merit goods? You've got about 30 seconds, go. Put something in. Very good, carry on. For free. Yes, well done, Arena. Very good. Well explained there, Ensign. Well done. Let's see, Max. Good work, Max. Yes, you're on the right path there.
Dad, why are you looking back here and walking?
For a change, son. It's nice to do things for a change.
And then see what would happen with me?
Yeah, it's good to have a different. Oh, very good, Ian. Done. Yeah. Oops. Yes, that's the right idea. Excellent, Sharaf. Well done. Right, so we're getting it there now. That's fantastic. A couple others who haven't thus far answered. Very good, Andrew. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. Now, we know about education. We know about training because we're in it right now, in it to win it. Yeah, see what I did there? All right.
I'll get it.
Now, private benefits. So this is for you, okay? So when we talk about private, we're talking about you yourself. And what are the benefits to you personally of consuming education and training? So this won't be a big surprise to you, right? You personally accumulate, that means gather together, more human capital. That's your skills, your inherent skills. You gather more skills and knowledge and ability and productivity and all of those sorts of things. Therefore, because of this, you should earn higher incomes over your lifetime because you're getting more educated. There should be some level of personal satisfaction and utility. Hey, you don't need to tell me that. You guys are IB learners. Hey, you always get personal satisfaction and utility because it's the IB. Right. Reduced risk of unemployment because you are more employable because you have a better education. Sometimes that can work not necessarily always in your favor. For example, if you are too educated, it might be difficult for people to be able to afford you. But it does mean that potentially you are greater flexible-wise with regards to your occupation, right? You've got more skills, more abilities, so therefore potentially you can pick this job or that job or this job or that job, okay? So those are what's called private benefits. So private benefits to you of consuming education. For this side, we're talking about external. So external, so outside benefits. What are the benefits to society of you consuming education? Right? So it's not the benefits to you. This time we now need to look at society. All right? So if you are skilled, then therefore the entire productivity of the country improves and maybe our GDP growth grows as well. Growth increases. That would be a good thing. Your higher productivity and employment provides the government with a greater long-term flow of tax revenues. It also means that you're less likely to be unemployed, so they're not going to have to pay unemployment benefits. It also means, because you're more educated, that you may not vote for idiots like Donald Trump, right? You're more educated, so therefore you're less likely, on average, okay, now this is a bit tenuous here, but less likely to commit crime, maybe, all right? We'll try that one. Okay. Now, market failure in training, because this is the point, all right? The point is that we don't have the training, we don't have the education, the productivity. We don't have enough education. We don't have the right types of education. Yeah, I mean, you think about the computers and the technologies that there are in the world now and coming. Right, we're not necessarily training for that. Yeah, but maybe we need to have more training in that. Yeah? So, is that a failure in the market? Should the government be saying, "Hey, look, you need to be learning computer programming, all of you, boom, 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 boom," Or maybe computer programming is old hat. Maybe you need to be learning about AI and VR and all of those other sorts of things. So therefore, maybe that market has failed. Right, next point. A public good. If it is a public good, you might remember this all the way back from the start. Who makes it? Who provides it? Well, if we compare it, so this is a comparison to a private good, okay? Those private goods, they're going to be the ones that you regularly purchase in a market, okay? They're private, they're for you. They're regularly purchased in the market. They're produced by what's called the private sector, right? The private market, and they have certain characteristics. They have certain characteristics, one of which is that we say they are excludable, right? That means people can be excluded from consuming the product if they don't pay for it, right? It makes sense. You go to the market, you don't have the money, you can't get the product, right? If you don't pay, you don't consume. That's the rule with regards to private goods. They are excludable. That means that if you don't have the money, you cannot get the good. Doesn't matter if you really want the new iPhone 12, all right? If you don't have the money, can't get it.
Because you don't have enough money. If you don't have enough money, you can't buy anything.
All right, close the gaps. Where you go.
Yeah, right, but if you have money. Okay.
Oh, some good marks coming through. Well done, people. Well done. About another 30 seconds. Come on, Winhow. Come on, Sariha. Have a go. Come on, Darwin. Good work. Well done. And we should have said that private goods are excludable. Consumers of private goods can be excluded from consuming the good if they're not willing to pay. For example, a ticket to the theatre or a sporting event or a meal in a restaurant. If you don't pay, you don't get to consume. Well done. Private goods, therefore, are what we call rival. So next terminology to learn, rival. That means that if one person consumes it, there is less for the other person. Okay, you've got a pizza. One person eats half of the pizza, a third of the pizza, quarter of the pizza. All right, that means there's less for the other people to consume. That means it's rival. Scarce resources are being used up. There is a definite and very clearly defined opportunity cost with regards to their consumption. They are classified as being rival, which is a kind of an odd term, and I apologize for that. We also say that private goods are rejectable. Now, what we mean by that is that you don't have to buy them. Whereas with some of the public goods that we've discussed, the medicines and, well, education perhaps, it might be forced on you by the government saying you must do this. So private goods are excludable, private goods are rival. Two very important terms. Understand? What does it mean for a private good to be rival? Again, 30 seconds on the clock starting now.
I think they're going pretty well
about 30 odd seconds, come on. Some answers coming in. Good, well done, Jensen. You're on the right path, Andrew, but it's more about what's left over for the others. They're actually going to decrease the total amount of the resource, the good that there is. Yes, okay. All right. Right, we need to make sure that we regularly review our terms and that we add things to glossaries, and that if we're not sure, we make sure that we find out and or ask. Public goods. Now, these were the ones we described before. These were the ones that are not provided by the private sector, potentially. All right? Because what we're going to discover is that the private sector, there's no real motive necessarily for them to provide public goods. And we're going to figure that out in a minute. Public goods have certain characteristics, just like the private goods, and they're going to be the opposite, okay? So the first one is that they're going to be non-excludable. So if somebody hasn't paid for it, you can't exclude that person from this. Now that's a wee bit tricky, as you understand, because if you are in the private sector and you're wanting to earn a profit, right, you're wanting to sell the product, but you can't prevent people from using your product, consuming your product, then how on earth are you going to earn a profit from it? So therefore, public goods theoretically, in theory, are non-profit making. There's no profit incentive to the production of them. So therefore, why would the private sector produce them? So that's going to be a big clue as to why it is that there aren't enough of them. Why the government is going to say, we need more of these public goods, why the market has failed with regards to public goods. We're also going to say that they are, again, it's the opposite. They are non-rival. So if one person consumes the product, then that doesn't reduce the availability of it to someone else. Okay, they can still have as much as they want. Okay? Now, again, you're going to be thinking, what kinds of goods are these? We're going to explain that. All right? We're also going to say that it is very hard to reject these goods. Once they're there, it's going to be very difficult to avoid them. Sometimes the government will actually say you must consume the good. Now, here's where this theory comes into light. Now, what we're going to find is that there are pure public goods. Okay, those are goods that hold to those definitions really strongly. And those are ones like the examples given. So the national defense, the lighthouse, right? You know, you put a lighthouse up protecting the boats, the light, right? And street lighting. Those sorts of things. I like the street lighting example, okay? Because it's there. You can't, you know, you don't pay for the street light, it's there. By you standing under the street light, it doesn't prevent somebody else from enjoying the street lighting. Well, unless you're, you know, like 12 to 20 feet tall and, you know, built like a house, then maybe you can prevent them from consuming the street light. Then there are things called semi-public goods, or, yeah, apologies, an old-fashioned term again, quasi-public goods, which does sound like an Australian animal. Apologies for that, quasi. You gotta go find the quasis. All right? That wasn't an Australian accent. That really wasn't an Australian accent. Apologies for that one. There are products that are public in nature, but they don't have full non-excludability and non-rival. So those ones that you've talked about already, the meritable goods, right? So the public education and public health care, you could suggest that they would be semi-public goods, because they're not fully non-excludable and they're not fully non-rival, potentially. Right? And again, we come back to that idea about equity. Right? The government will provide these goods potentially directly, right? Because they want more consumers to consume them. We are under-consuming them. And they also want them to be available they want them to be more accessible for individuals whose incomes might be lower. Right? So that then comes an equity argument. So the market fails to provide the public goods. The government steps in to try and provide them, but as we're going to see, maybe the government fails in this regard as well. They are attempting to improve equity, but again, maybe they aren't doing it well. All right, okay. Motorways, public parks, gardens, galleries, museums, said those. We're going to skip past that. Equity grounds, efficiency grounds. Now, the government will provide these, but they're going to come across something called a free rider problem. Now, when we talked about the idea of non-excludability, right, if you can't prevent someone from using the product, then you're going to end up with what's called a free rider problem. Okay, another term, apologies, another term. Right, and this one talks about people who, and you've probably seen this. In fact, I'm sure you will have. If you've ever done group work in class, and you know, a couple of you do all of the work, and then the others kind of hang around and don't do the work, and then oh yay, we all get the result. Yeah, they would be classified as free riders. Okay, they're not excluded on the grounds that they're in your group, you're in your team, but they're not necessarily doing the work. And it's the same with these goods. If they are pure public goods and you can't prevent somebody from using the good, right, because you're not charging them, then they're going to probably use it and maybe abuse it, right, because you can't stop them from doing it. So they're classified as free riders. Right? So if the government is sorting that out, then it's up to the government to try and figure out how to overcome the free rider problem, but also how to correct for the idea about equity. There's the free rider problem, you can't exclude them, they've got no incentive to pay, they are the free riders. Skipping that, moving on. Right. The free rider problem means that private provision will lead to undersupply of a public goods. That suggests the government should be involved. They should be figuring out how to provide these goods for everybody. However, we've also got to consider what's called international cooperation, right? Because some of our goods, as you understand, are actually international. Some of the things that we need to do, like, what have we got here? World security and climate change, they're not just local, they're global. So therefore, you also need international cooperation. And what we find is that the free rider problem is also going to apply there. Now, when you've seen the studies and you'll see more about, you know, climate change and how much it costs and all of those sorts of things, there are going to be some countries who are going to say, well, let's let the rich countries pay for it all. Or world security, oh, it's too expensive for us to, you know, do this. Yeah. All right, America, how much it costs to be a member of the United Nations. America, how much the climate change issue was to cost the American economy. That's very isolationist, not international and not cooperative. So that's going to be part of that free rider problem as well. And it's a big example of why market failure is also an international problem as opposed to just a local one. Now, next one, market failure. Here it is, mobility. I'm going to whip our way through this one. The idea that your factors of production, land, labor, capital, enterprise, all of those factors of production, they might not be able to move. They might be immobile, unable to move. And as a result of them being unable to move, then there's potentially going to be a misallocation of resources. And that is a market failure, right? You're lacking efficiency. Our market model assumes that factors are going to be able to move anywhere they like. But we know that's not the case. I mean, here at the moment, you can't get labor everywhere around the world, can you? Right? But also your land-based resources, they're potentially locked in one particular place. So even if the market says it would be better for those resources to be somewhere else, more efficient, you can't move them. Right. What barriers are there? Well, there are lots of different barriers to prevent factors from moving. I mean, just something as simple as your passports, right? And the borders, the barriers with regards to labour use, permits that you need, and all of those other sorts of things. And obviously the physical structures, right, that may not be there. So if we can't switch easily between different sectors, even within an economy or even internationally, then we can say that there is a loss of productive efficiency. Right? Now, you don't need to necessarily, this is just a case study, yeah? So in the UK, 1/3 of the adults do not have a basic school leaving qualification. You may not have heard that before. That's 1/3 of all adults in the UK do not have a basic school leaving qualification. And when I say basic, I'm talking IGCSE level. All right, now that is double the proportion that you'd see in Canada and Germany. All right, so there are also, they've given this is again, case study in the UK, 5 million people in the UK have no qualifications at all, none. 1 in 6 adults do not have the literacy skills expected of an 11-year-old. So that's reading and writing. Right? And half of those do not have the level of what's called functional numeracy, able to add and subtract. Right? Now, it sounds silly about why we're so interested in literacy skills, but you think about, signing job contracts. Do you understand that? But even just signing to pay for something, all right? You sign a contract to pay for who knows what, sign a contract to set up your rental agreement. Well, if you can't read the rental agreement, you don't know what it says. If you can't decipher your, credit card statement, right? That's a real issue, and that's the UK. We're not talking about America. We're not talking about other countries where that's potentially even higher. And in New Zealand, it was, quite a concern as well. Right? It was around 1 in 5, so about 20%. Right, so how might factor immobility lead to market failure? Again, just short explanation. You've got about 30 seconds. Go.
I am the best woman. Oh, coming. Oh. Incredible.
All right. Very good. Well done, man. Good. Well done, Sharaf. Yes. Well done. Very good, Andrew. Oh, I like that. Well done, Fatima. Look at that. That's very good. Okay. Yes, well done. Okay. Now, we need to make sure we're breathing, okay, at this particular juncture, all right? Just, okay. Now, there's going to be some concepts in here that are going to challenge you, and there's going to be some graphical analysis that is needed, all right? So, pens and paper potentially as well, just so you can do quick sketches to make sure you're understanding, right? This next subunit to the subunit to the subunit, right? This bit is going to take us into next week, right? We're not going to work our way through all of this now, but we will start and get a bit of a head start into it. All right, so we're going to be looking at different aspects here. We're going to be looking at what's called positive externalities and what's called negative externalities. Now, we see already this idea of external, and we've talked about this a little bit before, that we're going to be talking about things that are external or outside of the market. So when we're talking positive and negative, we're talking about things that are outside of the market, costs and benefits that are outside of the market. So they're not included in what the market normally charges. And so therefore that's going to be considered a market failure. All right. And the other thing to note is I've received an official email from Miss Amanda with a list of HLs versus SLs. That's apparently now all sorted. If you don't think it's all sorted, then that's a conversation you need to have with Amanda, all right? But what's going to happen is in the not too distant future, right? We might be back at school by then. Hopefully we will be. We're going to be needing to discuss some HL only content, in which case SL learners won't need that particular aspect. Right? There's still a little bit floating in and around that's HL only, right? But there are full sections of work that are HL only, and when we get to that point, then I will be saying, SL learners, you don't need to be there for that bit. Positive and negative externalities. So, firstly, let's think about this whole idea of what an externality is. Right? External, outside of the market. These are the effects that a decision by consumers and producers have on what's called a third party, someone who's not directly involved in either the production or the consumption of the product. Right? It's not that you've been to one party, two parties, this is your third party. No, no, no. Right? It is that this is a person who is external to the actual transaction, right, that has taken place. Because you've got producers, consumers, that's one and two. Then there's a third party, right, a third wheel, if you like, who's external to this particular transaction. Right, so if we say that these effects are positive, then they are beneficial, they are good effects on those third parties. If we say they are negative externalities, then there are additional costs or bad things that are being incurred, affecting the third party. Incurred means affecting. All right. So that's externalities. So next thing to do, close the gaps. Work, scores coming in. Keep going. Okay. Take it off. And the switch goes forward. All looking good there. Very good. The effects of a decision by consumers and producers that have an impact on a third party. So positive externalities, those are going to be beneficial effects on third parties. Negative externalities, they're the costs that are incurred by those third parties. All right, Now we need to understand what's called a difference between a private cost and a social cost. And it's exactly as you kind of think. If you consider the word social and understand that the word social in this context is about society, it's about us, about everybody. Whereas private is going to be about those who are directly involved in the transaction. So a private cost is paid only by the producer or the consumer concerned. So supply and demand, it's those direct people. Right? Those are what's called internal costs with regards to the production or consumption of this particular product. Social costs, they're going to be all of those private costs plus the external costs, so the things that are outside, the things that are affecting society. Those are going to be your social costs. So you add all of those private costs, and they still affect you, then you add your external costs as well. Right? Negative externalities add to your social costs. Positive externalities are actually going to reduce your social costs. All right? So the consumer and the producer don't take those external costs into account. And that's one of the big things. That's again a market failure, just the idea that they're not taking those costs into account. So should we force those costs back into the market? Should we educate people to change their decisions with regards to production and or consumption? Should we regulate the market? So go back to, again, a more command-based structure and say, bang, you just can't consume this product or you can't produce the product. Right? Remember, a pure free market doesn't have any government intervention. So even if it's a demerit good, you can just produce or consume as much of it as you like, and anybody can. So where does the command start and the free market stop? Right? That's decisions based on your values. Yeah. Right. This can lead to a misallocation of resources. Yeah. In New Zealand, there's a law that says people under the age of 16 are not allowed to smoke cigarettes. Just saying, just as an example here. Yeah. I don't know about the rest of the world, but I do know that there are some countries where that law doesn't exist, and people well younger than 16 are smoking. And I'm not saying that people under the age of 16 in New Zealand don't smoke, because some do, right? But we're just saying that that's actually technically illegal. Right, and inefficient market allocation of resources ends up being that the social welfare is not maximized. There is market failure. When we're talking about social welfare, you'll remember that that's the efficiency idea. That's the idea of consumers and producer surplus, so consumer surplus and producer surplus being combined, being maximized, all right? So when you add your consumer surplus to your producer surplus, that idea of a global surplus, if you will, is what we call social welfare, or the benefits to society. Consumer surplus plus producer surplus. And if that's not maximized, then there is market failure. And we've got lots of market failures involved with that. And then, of course, we're going to look at the government policies to try and fix this. And we're going to see that maybe their policies are also going to be a failure. All right? Okay. Now, the benefits, all right, the flip side, all right, we had private costs and social costs. Now we're going to have private benefits, which again are just those directly involved in the consumption of the product or production of the product, okay? So the supply and demand, who gets the benefit? Well, the satisfaction, the utility, the consumers get that, and the revenue, the producer gets it. So that's a private benefit. A social benefit is going to be those private benefits plus any external benefit to society that we might get, right, as a result of you consuming those products, right, or the producer producing it. So when we talk about positive externalities, those are going to be activities where there is an external benefit that is positive. Right? When we talk about negative externalities, those are going to be products where there is a negative external benefit, right? Like a disutility. Right? So social benefit greater than private benefit, or in this case, social benefit less than private benefit. Explain the difference between private and social costs. Again, 30 seconds, go. Here we go. Answers coming in. Yep, you're on the right path with that, Ian. A little bit bigger than that, but you're on the right path. Yes, good. Well done, Joel. Yes, very good, Andrew. Waiting on a couple more.
Boom, 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 boom. Ui. 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 I have a wig.
Well done, Fatima. Look at that. Yeah, so the second-hand smoke becomes part of the social cost. Yeah. Second-hand smoke is the externality, the external cost, and then you add that to the private cost, and then it becomes the social cost. But well done. Good effort, team. Rock stars. Look at you all there. Good. Excellent. Now I think I'm trying to work out where I was wanting us to get to. Right. A little bit on terminology here, just so I can throw this to you. In the old days, one of the terms that we used to use to describe externalities was spillover effects, right? So if you're looking through textbooks, if you're looking online, you might see the term spillover effects in reference to the term externalities. They are the same thing, right? The spillover effects and externalities, when we're using them in this context, they mean the same, right? So if you see that, then you can understand that one. Externalities, those are the external costs. They're going to lie outside of the market. Now, what we can see is that there are going to be costs that lie outside of the market that are based on the production of the good, and they could be negative or they could be positive. There are going to be costs and benefits that lie outside of the market that are going to be either, well, they're going to be based on consumption, and they're going to be either negative or positive. So there are four different types of externalities that we need to come to grips with. Right? Negative production externalities, positive production externalities, negative consumption externalities, and positive consumption externalities. And each one of those ideas, we need to do some work on the theory of it. There will be some graphical understandings that need to be made. We also need to think about the government's response to these, as well as the government's response to some other market failures that might be there. All right. So we're going to be thinking about all of those. Yes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a stop sharing like this and jump back to the meet like this. I'm just going to push this button here just for a second. Jump back to the meet. Right. So team, several things, right? There was a lot of terminology to go through today. So please be reviewing the terms. If you're not sure about them, obviously you can look online and do some more investigating about them. Please ask as well. There's also Think IB where you can look things up and have some work through of that. I've sent you a number of materials, right? Some revision materials, some practice materials as well to have a go through. And there is a lot more that will be coming over the next few weeks. So just try and keep up with those. Make sure you're filing things into a good system so that you know where things are. So I sent you a mock-up of an exam question for paper 3. Right? Now, paper 3 is only going to be HL learners. Yes, I understand that. So if you're an SL learner, you can listen, right? But so those questions in there, there's international trade ones were there too. but there is a whole section on market failure, and it gives you the questions, the suggested solutions within it, the student exemplars. I say student exemplars, you know, right? They're actually written by a teacher, but yeah. Okay. Then the examiner feedback with regards to that, and then some hints and tips from me with regards to that paper as well. So please keep that in mind. Go through that at some point. Have a look to see what it's all about. I've also recently sent you a thing about writing an essay in economics with some exemplars about using the different skills. All right, and I've got another document that's going to be coming soon. All right, that breaks down like a checklist of things that need to be done, and that will be very important again, because in the next week, 2 weeks, over the next 2 weeks, one of the tasks that we're going to be looking at is your internal assessment and your IA. Now, when I'm explaining that to you, one of the things I'm going to be talking about is obviously when it's due. Yeah? Don't panic, okay? Because what we do is we do what's called a submission. Now, if you like, it's a draft, okay? So when you submit work for your IA for economics, right, the final deadline for that is going to be when you're in year 13. So up until then, you're going to submit 3 submissions, right, that are drafts. Then in your year 13, you're going to, if need be, you may not need to, but in year 13, you might want to rewrite aspects of them, right? And then you resubmit those, okay? And that then is your final submission, okay? That's how that works. So the ones that you come through, you know, over the next little while, they are drafts in a sense. Okay, you do your best work on them. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to give you written feedback on them. I will mark them. I'll explain how that all works. Don't panic, right? And then you use that feedback between them and a date in year 13, right, which will be very close to now, but when you're in year 13. And at that point, you will perhaps make some changes to those IA commentaries and resubmit them as final copies, okay? All right, but you don't need to worry about the finals. You just need to actually do it, all right? And you'll get some feedback on that. But I'm going to wait a little bit longer before I do much more explaining about it, because ideally what I would like is I would like us to be in school, okay? Because what I would like is I would like to actually physically give you an exemplar of an IA, okay, so that you can see. I also would like to show you the format and the structure, all right, and talk you through that. But because the format and the structure is different from the old syllabus slightly, right, then I need to just add a bit more emphasis, and I'd rather do that in person. Now, I know that's, you know, may not happen, right, in which case then we can cope with that. I also need to make sure that we've covered a bit more of the market failure topic before I introduce that, because that's what we are going to be looking at, right? You're going to be looking at. In particular, this idea about externalities that we're currently looking at, that's going to be the focus of your IA commentary, all right? So we'll deal with that, okay, when we get there. So keeping up with the work that's been set, making sure that if there is work that you haven't done from previous tasks, that you work your way through that, reviewing all the terminologies that we've been looking through, asking any questions that you need. Those are all tasks that are upcoming for you. And as well as that, please have a bit of a mental break, right, so that you do not have a breakdown. That's important, okay? We will hopefully be back at school soon, all right, in which case we can be a bit more interactive potentially as well. And there are some quite cool things to work our way through physically as opposed to doing them distance-wise. All right, so otherwise, as we say in the land of my birth, hei kōrera, which means goodbye for now.
Bye, sir. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Thank you.
Bye, sir.
Boing, boing, boing.
Thank you. Goodbye, goodbye. Bye. 3 of you still in.
That one's really cool.
Ariane, you all right?
Yes, I just wanted to ask you, where are the elasticity calculations on the In Thinking IB site that we were supposed to do?
Okay. I don't know. I'll have to look at the site myself and see. I set you some tasks the other week. I can't remember. I'll have to have a look and see. Okay. All right.
But
Thank you.
apart from the last tasks, did you add any new ones or just the
No,
ones from last?
that was at that point. Now that we're looking at market failure, I'm going to be able to add a bit more in there, but that won't be until next week.
Okay. Thank
Okay.
you. Bye.
Bye.